the advertising market looks a lot more like the stock market. You know, you do some things, you buy some shares for the long term. So you buy and hold, that's your brand building. And you're doing some things in the short term, right? Like, you know, which is your tactical day trading. But, you know, in many respects, the media market has become a lot more like the stock market, a highly transactional market where you're able to transact assets very quickly and frequently. So to my mind, I think that's just a fundamental shift that we're seeing across media. Now, what does that mean in measurement and things like that? It means that your requirement to generate signal and interpret signal has never been higher.
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the E-Marketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
Hi, I'm Kevin Lee with the E-Marketing Association. I wear a bunch of other hats and businesses in the for-profit, nonprofit world. Been doing digital marketing a long time, so it's always been a challenge knowing what's working and what's not. So that's why I'm super excited to be chatting with Henry Innis, who founded Mutinex. So Henry, why don't you start with the quick elevator pitch of what was the origin story?
Well, depends on what version you want. I think the real origin of this business is like many people. You know, I spent time in data science, data star roles, strategy roles across the agency groups, and primarily I dealt a lot with market mix models, built a few myself, and they're quite unwieldy things. I don't really think that they're very good products. You know, for the end user, the marketer. And as a result, the attribution industry as a whole feels a bit like made for kind of the data scientists in it rather than made for the end users. Broadly, I think that's a very interesting problem to solve because nobody wakes up in the morning and goes, I want to buy a market mix model. They do wake up in the morning and go, I need an answer to this really tough question. I need guidance on how to solve X, and so on and so on. And so I think that's a very interesting set of problems to solve. I think that most marketers can't get answers so that they can make decisions quickly or experiment quickly. And I think that's a challenge worth solving because the cost of getting an answer for every marketer right now is huge. We've all been in those rooms where someone asks the CMO question, CMO says, let me get back to you. We all go do a bunch of work. And then the decision was already made in the room. I would say that's a huge volume of marketing decisions today. And if we can solve that problem for the marketing industry, we'll repair credibility in the boardroom. But we'll also make a lot of marketers happier people, which I think a great product doesn't just solve a problem. It makes people have a happier life. And I think that's, worth doing.
All right. Well, we'll have you down as creating happier lives for CMOs, which I think everyone can check off on. So, back when I learned about marketing mix models in 1991, when I was going to grad school at Yale, the fractional factorial designs that I was taught required a fair amount of data in order to develop that experiment to know, or if you obviously weren't running a fractional factorial, you just needed a pretty large data set. And I'm curious how the math has evolved to allow for medium-sized marketers to get the sizes of the kinds of answers that they want about the media mix and the marketing mix. And I use marketing mix because that, of course, includes potentially earned media as well as paid media. So, I think marketers want to know about both of those. They don't just want to know, how do I allocate my paid media budget? But has the math allowed you guys to start to answer the questions more effectively than requiring, a Fortune 1000 level marketer spending millions a month?
The models have evolved considerably. Bayesian models effectively allow you to guide to guide a model as to where you should look or where you should principally look, which is very different to the world of frequentist models where you're kind of running the algorithm and the algorithm takes you where it takes you. So I think a lot of those structural problems have been solved of how to guide a model. Have we perfected everything so that we can operate on very small data sets? No. I think that most marketers still need complete data sets, and they need complete data sets to work. And I think that that's kind of been a really, really important aspect to any kind of marketing mix models. It's also why I'm not a fan of media mix models, because I think they just emit a whole ton of variables and there's basically no point to doing them. Um, so, so that's kind of why, I think we've solved some of the problems, not all of the problems. I have little doubt that somebody will eventually solve the problem of like, okay, we don't have this many data sets. What should we do? Um, and so I think that will eventually come to the fore. But doesn't feel like a solved one yet.
Right. So how does your platform differ from other media mix models that folks may have tried and felt exasperated with? Obviously, speed of getting an answer is important, but it sounds like you guys are solving additional problems and differentiating in other ways as well.
So I think it's kind of three elements. It's one, speed; two, processing of the information; and three, the interface. So like if I look at speed, I think that speed we are pretty much unparalleled because we can take relatively unstructured data. If you think about the process for anyone getting a market mix model in, everyone says they've kind of got APIs. Really what they mean is they have somebody who can connect to the API and an analyst on their side who's going to wrangle the data for you. It's still a very painful process. um, the market mix models take weeks to kind of do because the analysts are handcrafting the priors, and as they're updating them, a lot of the time those priors may become miscalibrated or something along those lines. And then finally, most market mix interface, I mean, if you've seen them, they all look like they're built in RStudio as opposed to, an actual real user experience. It's almost like the data scientists are just taking their notebooks and putting them on the web. Um, so I think all of those can contribute to how we solve the problem. One, we make it really easy to take in unstructured data. Two, we have legitimately what I see as one of the fastest and most accurate models on the planet. We put our money where our mouth is there. We put open source governance across our models. Why do we do that? You should be able to benchmark our models against everybody's, and you should be able to see every line of code we're using to test our models, because testing is not a proprietary thing. You only kind of need to be closed about what's proprietary to your business. The rest of it should be open source, in my view. And then third, I think we've got a beautiful interface that marketers genuinely love and use. If I look at our average kind of time on site, time per user on site per month, the average sits at about 160 minutes per user. So, that means the average user spends 3 hours a month in our platform, which is fairly significant if you think about like how widely distributed we generally are across a business. We generally have 10 plus users across a business. So it's a very high number and a high volume of usage. And I always think that usage alongside model accuracy are the two things you want to see the most of, right? You can kind of optimize your life to, are we consulting to the client and things like that? But all that kind of tells you is, are you able to sit in lots of presentations? That doesn't optimize to me to the one metric that makes marketers happy, which are you making their lives better and easier by making something so easy to use that, they're happy enough logging in without sending us an email. So we have amazing support teams. We have a fully fledged marketing science team, but the running joke in our business is the platform is so easy to use that, it'll be easier to log in than to send an email. And pretty much most times that's true.
Right, right. That's given how long marketing measurement's been around and mixed models as well. What do you think's changed? What's been the biggest change recently that you think should have marketers who perhaps had a bad experience in the past to come back and revisit?
Well, one, the models are in the cloud. That makes a huge difference. So as models shift to the cloud, what that forces is it forces things to be productionized properly. So the models have to run with clean code. They have to run in the cloud. I'm not afraid to say that, we've stuffed some things up along the way. There's no doubt about that. As we've kind of taken our models into the cloud, we've stress tested them on different use cases. I once got fired because we didn't provision infrastructure very well on a client. We didn't know where the problems would come to before stress testing it heavily. So there's definitely moments and learning moments that you have, but once you're productionized on the cloud, it's a different ball game to kind of running models in some analyst laptop and things like that, and being reliant on that world, which is the legacy consulting world. I think most clients would be shocked to hear how frequently the sophisticated model that you think is running on your business was really built by a 24-year-old analyst who just worked for 72 hours and wasn't magically constructed by the beautiful platform that the provider had. And so I think that's a fairly common case. And so getting that sense of reliability is very important.
So what do you think the biggest misconceptions are that marketing leaders have about media mix models and marketing mix models?
One, that all methodologies are equal. Really, MMM stands for about 50 different variants of methodology. Two, that you can't objectively test models. You absolutely can and should. We released an open source transparency protocol to do that. And three, that they can't be beautiful, easy to use products that feel more like Canva than Adobe Photoshop. And I think that we are entirely moving to a world where we are building the Canva type approach where it's beautifully easy to use, as opposed to the fidelity of an Adobe product. I think it's quite ironic that Adobe put a piece of market mix modeling software into their stack. I did think to myself, isn't your stack bloody bloated enough before you do something else poorly?
It's an interesting point of view for sure. So it seems like to some extent having everything in an accurate dashboard and having the data be timely sort of opens up new opportunities for the marketer, right? So now they now have an opportunity to change the kinds of questions that they ask and the frequency with which they ask them, which seems somewhat empowering and perhaps is what's driving that time in the application, right? That they suddenly can answer questions they didn't think they could ever answer before.
Yeah, I think I'd go a step further. I'd ask the question, why is it so hard to be data driven in marketing? Yeah. It's because the cost of being data driven is really high. We've got data everywhere, but actually to be data driven, you've got to be able to answer questions very quickly and easily. And because we've got so much data, it's very, very hard to answer those questions quickly and easily. It costs a lot of money. You've got to hire lots of analysts, lots of people running around, all of that side of things. I think a platform like ours takes the cost of asking those questions down to zero for a customer. Now, what's the benefit of that? Fundamentally, when your cost goes to zero to answer a question with data, you go from when something costs a lot of money, you do it less. So when something's very cheap, you generally do it more, right? Sometimes I eat at the local deli in New York, like probably way too many times, more than I can count. But I don't really go to Nobu, every night for dinner, right? It's the same thing with data-driven marketing. We answer questions more selectively than we should with data because it costs a lot to do that. So I think that the fundamental use case of our platform is to take the cost of answering a question down to zero, the marginal cost. Now, if that happens, you suddenly go from, hey, we only have time to answer 10% of the questions to answering 100% of the questions with data. And when you do that, that's how you change the culture of a business to be data-driven. So I don't really see our platform as a pure play platform in solving the measurement problem. I actually see the fundamental use case is taking the cost of answering a question down to zero, which enables the cultural change for a business to become 100% data-driven.
Yeah, it's funny. It's making me remember how different just media planning cycles have gotten, right? When I first got into the agency business at McCann Erickson, pretty much the entire media plan was locked down by Thanksgiving for the next year with not a lot of wiggle room.
100%.
Obviously as things went digital, now it did it. We move stuff around on a day-to-day or hourly basis in the programmatic search, social, and programmatic search and social, as well as all the other stuff that's programmatic. And then the other stuff that's not real-time programmatic, we still move it around a lot. And it seems like agency mindsets have to adapt as well, right? Behind this sort of, you know, plan everything in advance, lock it in, and don't touch it, to, oh no, if the data indicates we should move money around because at the margin it works more hard, it works harder here, that they need to evolve the entire process around that data.
Yeah, well, I think businesses used to move at, the speed of, that once a year cadence. Now, the advertising market looks a lot more like the stock market.
Yeah.
You do some things, you buy some shares for the long term. So you buy and hold, that's your brand building, and you're doing some things in the short term, right? Like, which is your tactical day trading. But, in many respects, the media market has become a lot more like the stock market, a highly transactional market where you're able to transact assets very quickly and frequently. So to my mind, I think that's just a fundamental shift that we're seeing across media. Now, what does that mean in measurement and things like that? It means that your requirement to generate signal and interpret signal has never been higher. Who wins in the stock market? It's either the person who can trade the fastest, which is very, very hard for most brands, or it's a person who can answer and interpret things through algorithm quickly to get a differentiated perspective on how their portfolio stacks up against the market. And I think that's what brands can get out of measurement. If everyone's piling into the conversion APIs, it's extremely unlikely that anybody's going to get an advantage. So, whereas if people are looking to refine conversion APIs with, genuinely strong measurement signals, I think then it's very likely that people get an advantage.
Yeah, that's a great point about the leading signals as opposed to the trailing signals. If you can get a handle on those, that's super powerful. How do you think AI is reshaping how marketers are approaching measurement?
Well, AI is really a function of two things. One, it's the time and speed to insight. So AI can dramatically speed up the time to insight. And I think that's going to obviously impact things a lot. I think the second area is, are we going to be able to innovate new measurement techniques and algorithmic techniques? To some degree, measurement at the moment is still by and large predominantly a regression at its core to many degrees. There's some interesting work being done in spike neural networks by another company. We're doing some stuff where we're trying to innovate the model considerably as well. But I don't think that for the past 10 years, what I would describe as the legacy measurement vendors have really innovated the core IP and the core mathematics very well at all. And I don't think they wanted to invest in that. But I think that that's what AI is going to unlock, is new techniques in that space.
Yeah, to that point, I'd love to get your thoughts a bit on something that usually doesn't make its way into a lot of the models, which is the impact of creative, because it's right message, right time, right person, right? And so, usually some of the models, at least the ones I had seen over the years, really are focusing on, okay, well, the creative is a given, and then we're just going to see when I deploy the creative across all of these channels. Here's what the media mix is recommended, right? And it doesn't
Yeah.
take into the account the fact that, well, had the creative been different, the numbers would have been potentially an order of magnitude different. So, you need to factor the creative in. So, how do you think about the creative element of the model?
I'll have more to say on that in a few weeks, but for now, I think that creative is absolutely something that should be core to a model, and people who aren't including it are making a fundamental mistake in the model.
Okay, well, I must have jumped the gun then, because that just flew into my head as a question.
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting space. I'll have a lot more to say by mid-October. So
All right, well, I'm looking forward to that.
yeah,
So, with regards to the some of the conceptions or misconceptions that folks do have about media mix and measurement, at what level of spend, what level of company size should people start to think about, talking to folks like yourselves and putting some, stronger math behind their decisions?
I think anyone above 3 million US in spend should have a market mix model of some kind. You will get ROI off it. at that level unless you're in a very low margin business. So I think that it's really levels of spend and then variability in that spend. So I think anyone above that 3 million mark will generally do quite well.
So, what trends are you seeing, about how brands around the world MMM to drive strategy?
I think most brands are going through a strategic realignment of how they buy media. So I think we're at a stage right now where brands are very much transitioning from the old world model to the of kind of buy once up front to the new world model. And we've kind of been 50-50 for a number of years. I think the new world model demands that measurements is at the start and the core of every decision. But I think measurement is a problem design. So what do we have to do or what do we need to change? Not a solution design. What's the exact solve that we're going to implement? So I think that there's a really important distinction there within measurement as to what we do and don't do. I always like to say that knowing how to use something is as important as knowing what something is. And I think that's the case with measurement. It's there to problem solve and help articulate what the problems are as opposed to anything else, if that makes sense.
What else should marketers be thinking about as it relates to measurement and optimization in their media mix and in their marketing mix?
Well, what marketers should be thinking about as it relates to measurement in their marketing mix, I think the questions they should be asking is, how long does it take me to get an answer from my current measurement stack? Yeah. And if that answer is more than 2 hours, then you've got the wrong measurement stack. I think that the second thing marketers should be asking is, what's the internal cost of ownership of our measurement stack? So, how hard is it to get the data in, to optimize it? And the third thing that the marketer needs to think about is, if I'm doing 1 and 2 really well and I've gotten those 2 costs down dramatically, how do I reinvent my operating model to be more responsive and reactive to data as it comes through, to isolate kind of where I should and shouldn't be operating? And I think too many people kind of operate, they don't do those 3 things in sequence. Instead, the measurement program is brought in as a validation tool or something like that, rather than as seen as an organizational transformation. The next kind of 2 years are going to define which companies win in media and which ones don't. And the ones that win in media are the ones that are going to take their cost of answering questions down to very little, because it will allow them to move with unparalleled agility without headcount cost. And I think that's going to be a really transformative thing in media, because to be highly responsive, to operate in effect like a D2C brand or something like that 2 years ago was prohibitively expensive for most brands deploying capital. Most brands who are deploying high volumes of media, they might have 6 people, right, and 30 people on an agency deploying 30 million of spend, whereas a D2C business might have 200 people optimizing that spend. I think what this is going to unlock is that sense of agility that hasn't existed when being data-driven in big brands, and it's going to unlock, but that's going to really put a gulf between brands who have this technology at the core and brands who don't. Brands who don't they are literally just going to get left in the dust on this. They really are. And I fundamentally believe that.
One final question just has to do with an area where I've found people commingle 2 very different things, right? The measurement and analytics versus using the data that you get to actually predict the future, right? Because the data and analytics platforms just by itself is sort of like trying to drive down the street looking in the rearview mirror, right? You're looking at the past to try to make a decision about something in the future. So, how do you recommend people move into this mindset where they're understanding that, the data, good data in the right model allows them to essentially predict the future, right? Because it understands cause and effect.
Well, the future it's predicated on 2 things. One is, can you predict the future and test a model for that, which you can. 2, are you then able to very rapidly iterate the way that a model comes into a business? So the way that and the way I'd put this is, it's not just the ability to run the model. It's the ability to, as the model is changing or updating the information it's seeing, quickly incorporating that into how your business sees something. If you're using a model to predict the future, but you're only looking at that model quarterly, I mean, frankly, you're so I think that, and that's the way a lot of people use it. They go, well, I'm going to predict something for the next 12 months and I'll come back to it and blah, blah, blah. No, if you're relying on it for predictions, you should be looking at every damn week, and adjusting to the pace of it. So I think that's where a lot of marketers go wrong. Is, if you're using something, look into the future, look at that thing frequently. A hedge fund trader doesn't look at their model, once a quarter and then goes, oh, well, I'm going to wait till the next earnings report. They're looking at that model constantly. And I think that's where a lot of marketers need to be.
And should they be thinking about those areas of paid media that look a little bit more like earned media? When you think about social media where posts might come from an influencer and that get amplified, the lines get pretty fuzzy between paid media and earned media. And so how much of the day, can they get sufficient data quality out of the earned media side and some of these other sides?
Yes, it's not that difficult either. So I think that most MMM vendors have never actually executed an influencer campaign, so that's probably why they say that the data is not gettable. It absolutely is. It's just not true.
Well, that's good to know. Thanks so much for sharing your thoughts about the ecosystem with us and giving us a little bit of a hint of what your roadmap looks like. It's super exciting.
Yeah, thanks very much, Kevin. Appreciate it.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in the Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.